We are asking for the listed modifications Your Honor just listed.
I have a question before you go much further. Where is the brother's wedding?
That's in Boca.
So it's in the county?
Yes, Judge. All three activities, the brunch and the rehearsal are also
Out of
in Boca.
county?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yeah, so requesting this court's previous ruling, we are asking for the modifications you listed. I guess one thing you didn't list that we kind of added in to ensure her presence in court and safety in the community was that she would not be able to leave the county, so that would be an added restriction that would ensure her presence in court. And I kind of tweaked that a little bit in the bond motion. Secondly, she would remain on the GPS monitor, and she would remain living at her mother's house. She would still have no contact with Michael Dippolito and Mohammed Shihadeh. Her passport would remain surrendered, so she can't leave the country. Still prohibited from possessing drugs without a prescription, weapons, and the listed modifications, Your Honor, just discussed. And just briefly, there's no evidence that she's a flight risk. There's no evidence that she's a danger to the community. We went through all of our arguments last time. I'm not going to rehash all those. Your Honor heard them ad nauseum last court hearing. But
one other question, just in terms of the scope. When you're talking about her property, what are we talking about? The yard? What are we? I don't know.
It's a very small property, so that's not really giving her much more restriction. There's a small pool in the back. There's a little fence.
You're talking about leaving the patio to go into the backyard.
Yes, so that's a very minor modification.
Okay.
The bigger one being the curfew, obviously, Judge. But in addition to the arguments presented last time and her not being a flight risk, her not being a harm to others, and as stated in the motion, and I think looking at this and taking a genuine and realistic common sense approach to what's going on here and to the proposed modifications, she's no more of a flight risk or harm with these modifications than she is without these modifications. In terms of ensuring that she appears in court, that she doesn't harm the alleged victim, all of this court has been the GPS monitor. Any additional restrictions aside from the monitoring are punitive. I mean, this monitor has not stopped her from leaving the house. If she wanted to leave, she could have walked out and fled regardless of whether she can move around the county or is stuck in the house with the monitor. PBSO.
The monitor goes off and then someone's coming to find her and arrest her if she leaves an area that she's not permitted to leave. So, I mean, the monitor does serve a purpose. It's a monitor.
No, I agree it serves a purpose. What I'm saying is whether or not she's confined to her house with the monitor or she's permitted to move around the county with her monitor, PBSO still knows exactly where she is. So she's no more of a flight if she's in her house. If she wanted to take off, she could take off from her house, or she could take off from down the block. The monitor stays on her at all times. It's not a monitor that simply goes off when she walks out of her house. I mean, right now she has the monitor on her.
How they would monitor that then, because the purpose of a monitor is to set parameters on geographic location. And if you're just saying anywhere in the county, I mean, she can travel anytime she wants between these hours. There really is no restriction on where she goes during those hours. Then they can't really, it wouldn't be a violation, for example, to travel anywhere within those set hours, unless we're out of the county, I suppose. But, I mean, normally the monitor is set up for geographic restrictions.
Correct. She would be confined to the county, and she would not be permitted to travel within a certain distance of Michael Dippolito and Mohammed Shihadeh, which she currently can't do anyway. I believe when coming to court, my office, she has to drive around a certain location, so she doesn't pass by Mr. Dippolito's residence, Judge. So that wouldn't change. The GPS would still be confining her to this geographic region. I mean, I don't know how genuine we're being if we're saying PBSO doesn't know where she is, if she's outside of her house and being monitored by GPS, they can tell where she is, or if she's in her house being monitored by GPS.
Well, but they set up, I'm no expert on in-house arrest or CC2 on probation, but they set up the system where it sets off alarms within particular geographic areas. So they don't sit there and For example, if she were allowed to travel anywhere in the county, they wouldn't be following her live time all the time. It only sets off alarms if they go outside of a particular area.
Correct, but you can get maps of route she takes. I know.
Yeah, you can figure out where she's gone. What I'm saying is,
Correct.
they don't sit there live time and stare at a screen figuring out where Ms. Dippolito is all the time or anyone else is on house arrest. They set up alarms that go off if you go outside of a geographic restriction. That's the way they monitor. They're not sitting there looking at the hundreds of people they have on house arrest, watching them go around the county. It's a matter of it's setting off an alarm if you go outside of a restricted area. But go ahead and finish your argument.
Yeah, sure. So
We're probably getting into minutia at this point.
If she left the county, it would go off.
If that was the geographic restriction.
Correct. She could also coordinate, if Your Honor felt this is appropriate, she can coordinate with PBSO the night before as to her plans. We're not asking for that. We're thinking that's still too restrictive, but if Your Honor felt that was necessary, that's also something PBSO could do to put some confinement on where she goes. But, at this point, Judge, we've been through all the arguments. She's not going anywhere. She's come to every court appearance. She's not a harm to anyone. She will still be monitored. She's not leaving the county. I think at this point, having added restrictions is punishing her when she's presumed to be innocent.
Okay, Ms. Flores, State's position.
Judge, the state obviously would object. I'm sure the court knew that. I think what they're asking for is basically not to have a restriction. What he's asking for, you may as well take a GPS monitor off. As the court actually just said, what my thought was, that a GPS monitor is to ensure that someone is in a specific location in a time period, generally someone who is on house arrest, and let's not forget that bond is in lieu of sitting in custody. Somebody who's on house arrest is to make sure that they're in with that confined location, and there's parameters to allow you to do, obviously go to doctor's appointments, see your lawyers, and that's not been denied to her in this case, but to allow her to just basically free roam from pretty much all day, there's no way. I think to say, well, PBSO can look, and if she's not somewhere in the county, then that can be a violation, but I think that makes it even harder to track her. The point of GPS is ensuring that someone is in this county and is not going to flee here. And I think the ability to say, okay, we know that she's within this parameter of her home. If she's allowed to roam anywhere throughout this county, it would make it even harder if she did decide to flee, to be able to pinpoint exactly where she is. Obviously, if somebody is on GPS, and let's say hypothetically they're confined to their house on GPS, and they decide to flee and leave that house, what's not a time that they had prior permission, so the alarms go off at PBSO, they then can go quicker, basically be able to pinpoint down to a location where she is, versus Ms. Dippolito, where a monitor goes off. We don't know if she's leaving out of the south end of this county. We don't know if she's leaving out of the north end of this. It just makes it a lot harder, I think, to track somebody for the purpose of what a GPS monitor is for. In addition to that, Mike Dippolito lives in very close proximity to where Ms. Dippolito resides with her mother. And I think that it increases the inability to make sure that she is keeping a distance from him. And to allow her, basically they live in the same community. So if she's allowed to just go out and do all these different things and be wherever she wants, how are we going to ensure him as the victim and the alleged victim of this crime when she's free roaming the same area?
I understand your position on the first. What is your position on these other modifications? We've got backyard versus patio. We've got an event specific, which is a wedding.
The backyard, I don't know if it's a fenced-in area over a patio. I'm assuming that it's probably, I know the general area where her mother lives. I don't think that it's an expansive piece of property. I don't know that it's going to make that big of a difference to allow her an extra
an event specific
200 feet.
The wedding.
The wedding, I think if it's in Palm Beach County and we know the exact date and time, she was permitted previously to go to her sister's graduation and was given parameters. I think as long as there's time parameters placed on that, I wouldn't say to just be out of the house for a 3-day period, but I think if there's parameters of this is the location she's going to, this is the time period that she's going to be there, I don't know that the state would request her to miss someone's wedding, a family member's wedding. So with parameters on that, I don't have an issue with that. But then as far as meeting her lawyer at any time in any location, again, it's the same issue I have with basically just free roaming while on house arrest. It's not a restriction. I don't see why she can't meet with her lawyer at a set time and place, and as long as that's, approved through house arrest, I don't see why that presents an issue.
Okay.
I mean, it shouldn't be the ability of, hey, let's go grab a bite to eat and lunch. I mean, bond, there are restrictions. House arrest is not like, let's just go have a party and do whatever we want to do. I mean, there's restrictions for a reason. And I understand that their argument is that she's not a flight risk. She's been here for all these years, but I think somebody's flight risk continues the entire time that they have cases pending. She's added a child, or she's had a child, which in my argument would increase her flight risk of not wanting to potentially be convicted and taken away from that child.
Okay, if I can just
quickly
briefly respond. Regarding the wedding, she would return home every night. She's not staying down there in Boca. We provide Your Honor with a very specific order detailing where the wedding is, the times, and when she get home each night. And the same for the rehearsal and for the post-wedding brunch. Just regarding the flight risk, the state keeps saying she's a flight risk. They finished with that, Judge. There is zero evidence on the record that she's a flight risk. The fact that she has a kid doesn't make her a flight risk. Every client I've had with a kid there's not a presumption of them being a flight risk because they have a child. That's ludicrous to think that. We're dealing with the only evidence they presented last time was, well, she's charged with a serious crime. She scores 4 years, Judge. That, in comparison to most of the cases I handle, most of the cases in this courtroom, that isn't a very high score. So to say everyone who scores 4 years is necessarily a flight risk is, also stretching. I mean, the only arguments the state's made in the past 2 hearings is it's a serious crime and she has a kid. That doesn't indicate she's a flight risk. There's no other evidence. Regarding Mike Dippolito, yes, he does live in the community, but if Ms. Dippolito wanted to harm him, she could walk out of her house, go to his house, and harm him well before any PBSO deputies responded. It's not far at all. So to think that this, monitor she carries around is some magical device that's going to make sure Mike Dippolito doesn't get harmed it's unrealistic. Whether she's confined to her house a mile away from him, to which she could drive over there well before PBSO responded, or she's allowed to be given the freedom somebody presumed innocent is given, it's not going to change anything. And just regarding the restrictions for lawyers, it just makes it easier during trial. That's not a big restriction.
Well, can't that just be lifted during trial? I mean, during trial, obviously, you're here. You're not going to run back to your office every moment.
The things that we have going on, Brian can't always go to your office. And same thing with Andy.
Yeah, it's just tough. We have attorneys all over the county. We had Mr. Claypool down in Manalapan during trial. He had half of our, discovery down there. We had Mr. Greenlee staying up north. It wasn't always convenient to meet in my office. I know one day we were going to meet down in Manalapan. Actually, was it for lunch that day? And I spoke to
during the course of the trial?
Yes, and I spoke to house arrest deputy, and she wasn't permitted to do it because it wasn't my office. But
I really don't want to belabor this too much further. I think we're just going around the same arguments.
The last thing is your kid's getting bigger, Judge. It's getting really difficult to sit in the house with their kid all day and not do anything. She should be given some latitude in regard to her child.
Okay.
And grocery.
Defense motion is denied in part and granted in part. With respect to the request that she be permitted to leave from 8 to 6 each day, that portion of the motion is denied. Essentially, the purpose of in-house arrest is to have somebody on in-house arrest, so that's counter to the concept of in-house arrest. With respect to the request that she be permitted to as I understand it, I'll be specific about it, leave the patio and go into the backyard. In other words, other locations within the property, that's granted. I don't think there's any real difference between being on the patio and being in the backyard. I don't think it makes much difference as long as she's on her property. With respect to her brother's wedding, that is granted. She may attend the rehearsal dinner, wedding, post-wedding, brunch, all of that. The only requirement would be that she give her supervising officer the specific times when she's going to be gone. I approve those days and those activities. She just has to tell her supervising officer precisely when she's going to be there. As a general request to meet with her lawyer someplace other than your office, at this time that request is denied. However, at the time of trial, when we get to June 2nd, if you need those restrictions relaxed so that you can meet with Mr. Claypool at a different location or whoever else you may have assisting you at that time, I'll be happy to address that. I don't think I'll have any difficulty with that as long as we specify where you're going to be. I don't want a general, you can meet outside of your office and then not be nothing specific about where you're going. But in terms of relaxing it for trial preparation at the time of trial, I have no problem with that. Just come in before trial, tell me where you think everyone's going to be and what areas that she should be permitted to go. In terms of church, she already has permission to go to church at designated times. If there's another specific designated time for a specific activity, I'll consider that, but just a general, whenever she wants to go to church, I'm not going to grant. So that's kind of denied without prejudice. If there's another, I think it's Wednesdays now and Sundays, is that right?
I believe so.
If there's some specific activity related to church you want, on a specific time or day, I'll be happy to consider that, but just not a general. She can go to church anytime she wants. I believe that covers what's been requested. You probably will need to prepare an order on that.
Would Your Honor, I'm sorry, she was...
The only thing I would say, Judge, just for clarification in regards to the wedding, rehearsal dinner, the wedding, and the post-wedding, is the court imposing some type of curfew on her that night of what time that would be the time that she needs to be back home by?
I'm not going to micromanage that, candidly. The requirement is that she has to tell her supervising officer. If the supervising officer has a problem with it, I'll hear from him.
Okay.
I mean, it's just, she's going to tell the supervising officer, I'm leaving at 2, we expect to be home at midnight, whatever the case may be. She's going to tell the supervising officer, this is when I anticipate being there. Yeah, I think that'll cover it. Okay. Mr. Rosenfeld?
Would Your Honor entertain permitting her to go to the grocery store for 2 hours every week to a specific grocery store, but she'd have to let the house arrest know in advance, and go to the park with her child 2 hours a week? A specific park, which she would have to let the house arrest officer know about in advance. They'd know where she is. She'd be confined to a region. It would be pre-programmed.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to hold the restrictions as they are. So I'm assuming an Ori tennis request, I'm going to deny it this time. All right, we've got everything else set, so we don't need to do anything further.
The record you're finding needs to be the least restrictive conditions of pretrial release, Judge.
That's the necessary finding of my ruling.
Thank you, Judge.
He's going to prepare a written order. You're going to prepare a written order for me.
I'm going to type one up and send it to you.
That's fine. Just, you can send it electronically. Make sure you show Ms. Laurie the order before she can agree it's consistent with your rule. Joe, what do you have?
Good morning, Your Honor. David Gaudreau on behalf of Felicia Carr. Page 2 of Your Honor's docket. Ms. Carr has 3 other cases that are not on the docket with no future court dates. I've given those case numbers to the clerk. If we can reset all 4 cases for 30 days. Yes, we actually need to be appointed on these days. So I asked for the court to appoint us. I'm on the other 3 cases.
You're already on the other 3?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm going to appoint you on this case. Before we spend the 20, you want to go ahead and wait?
Yes, for today, one, if not, there will be waste form where we need information. Plus additional time to file 3 trial motions and a 30-day status check on all 4 cases.